It's Dwayne, and I am, like I say, I'm a content creator. I have several websites, one website. I have several different media channels as well as different social channels. And mostly everything that I do is geared around video games and tabletop games. Specifically tabletop games being miniature games and role-playing games, and some card games sprinkled in. Tonight, I'm trying a little bit of a different format. You're viewing this on the role-playing game show Twitch channel, which is I'm going to call it a partner channel of mine. The primary channel that I use ongoing is the Game Nexus, and the Game Nexus is my website, as well as my YouTube channel and my Twitch streaming channel. Mostly on that channel, you're going to find video game related content. You're also going to find some miniature gaming content as well. And mostly these days, you're going to find probably no content because I'm really struggling with trying to get content out into the world. One of my strengths in life is being a very creative mind, but due to the way that my brain is wired, when it comes to the actual working part of getting said creative ideas up and running, that's usually when I run out of steam. So it takes a lot to get me from point A to Z, and I end up dying somewhere in the middle of the alphabet usually. I'm great at A, but by the time I get to the middle, I'm burnt out and I'm on to another idea. And that's just the way that my brain is wired. So tonight is a different format. I'm actually going to try and work with this new format. I'm going to treat this as more of an ongoing stream show as opposed to generating stream content and YouTube content. And one of the things that I'm going to do is that I'm going to cautiously invite community members onto the stream, as opposed to just reading the chat and sort of performing for everybody. I would like to actually treat this role-playing game show Twitch channel as sort of a late night talk show, if you would, where I'm bringing members of community, obviously not celebrities, but who knows, maybe one day that'll be the thing, and bringing them onto the show so that I can have discussions. I think one of the strongest things that I have that's good about me is that I do love engaging in back and forth creative discussions. And sometimes I find streaming and just speaking to an audience that's out there doesn't really get me creatively fulfilled. So it is kind of an interesting twist. There's obviously going to be things that I need to be careful of. I can't just go and invite any old willy-nilly onto the channel. But I'm hoping that my sincerity and my honesty and wanting to have good discussions will sort of vet the people who are just looking for some quick fame or trolls looking to just tear me down. So with that said, I want to welcome you guys tonight and talk a little bit about what my program is going to be about tonight specifically. Tonight, I would like to actually talk about the G.I. Joe role-playing game. So for those of you who aren't aware, well, there's probably going to be a lot of you who aren't aware what G.I. Joe is, but for those of you who aren't aware what G.I. Joe is, G.I. Joe is a toy line / comic book / cartoon, firmly rooted in the 80s is when it was first introduced. And it played a big part of fueling my creative streak as a kid growing up. You might think, how could a cartoon do that, or what's the big deal, it's just toys. G.I. Joe to me was my first introduction to episodic storytelling. So as a kid, I loved comic books, and comic books really were where I sort of took off with my imagination. But when I was really young, G.I. Joe toys were my big thing, and I always felt that there was stories to be told with these toys. They just kind of screamed out to me that there's got to be stories. So, of course, as any kid does, he starts to role play with his toys. But when the cartoon came out, it really opened my eyes that there was this greater story and this greater world of G.I. Joe versus Cobra out there. And the way the cartoon series was laid out is it was laid out in an episodic format. Now, granted, there were miniseries and whatnot that they would have periodically throughout the years, but for each day that we watched G.I. Joe, it was a self-contained 30-minute episode. And in that episode, I saw And granted, I wasn't into D&D at this time, so this was predating D&D. But what I saw, what really sparked my interest, was that there was a full emotional, epic storyline being told in the crunch of 30 minutes that involved all my favorite characters, lots of cool things that I never imagined my toys being able to do. And that was really when I started really thinking about, I want to tell my own stories. Years later, of course, I was introduced to role-playing games by sheer happenstance, which is a story for another day. But as a result of being introduced to D&D, I then realized that D&D was a platform for me to tell stories that were brewed in my mind. Now, of course, G.I. Joe, the role-playing game, was far from that. But again, Dungeons & Dragons gave me that outlet. Years later, as I played D&D, I did realize that there was more than just D&D as far as role-playing games. I realized that there was a Marvel Superheroes role-playing game. And then there was science fiction, and there was all sorts of different genres of role-playing games. And as I grew up into a teenager, more and more kept coming. But there was never that G.I. Joe role-playing game. Now, full truth here, I actually created the G.I. Joe role-playing game before Renegade Studios did, in actual fact. Now, granted, it wasn't a beautifully crafted full role-playing system like I have today in front of me, but the idea of, hey, if I can play Dungeons and Dragons, why not play G.I. Joe? And for me, there was no limitations on creating that. I mean, I had a pencil, paper, and dice. I was going to make it. So I did. I started making the G.I. Joe role-playing game. I made a Transformers role-playing game. Heck, I even made a role-playing game for Mask, that cartoon, as well as Robotech, before the Robotech RPG came out. Like I said, my imagination just ran wild. So for me, the G.I. Joe role-playing game represents an entire life waiting for the game. That somebody else created and put a professional spin on it. And I can't wait to show it to you, and I can't wait to hopefully see more and more content. Here's the trouble I'm having. You think after all these years, it's just I'm going to jump in and play it. So the trouble I'm having is that nobody that I currently play role-playing games with is at all excited about it, because it is a long since dead toy line outside of us nostalgic adults who are collecting it still. But there's no current cartoon. There's no there's no movies to speak of outside of the last ones that came out. But there's nothing really to put that intellectual property at front and center. So for the most part, I'm reserved to having to farm through Facebook groups and other avenues to get players. I have started trying to create a group, and I've got stuff on the way, but I really needed to get the grips with the game before I could. And I also suffer from anxiety, performance anxiety specifically. So when it comes to dungeon mastering, I do consider myself a very good dungeon master, but I still have anxiety. And so finding a new group to play G.I. Joe, filled with a world of complete experts on the game, has kind of made me nervous about it. So I'm still in those early stages of building a group / learning the game. But tonight I thought I'd show you the game and give you a sense of what the game's all about, walk you through the basics. I've compiled an actual Google Slides that I'm going to show you tonight. That is my entry point for new people wanting to play the game. The game is not... I don't have the PDF. The game is available on a PDF, but I don't have the PDF. But what I've done is I've taken my hardcover rulebook and extracted chapters of it and portions of it and sort of redrawn them, represented them in Google Slides for new players in order to onboard them. So one of the things that I'm going to take it upon myself is to educate new people who want to play this game, can use me as a resource and can also use my materials as a resource as well. Okay, so what you're seeing right here is slide 1 of the slides that I've created. And again, the reason for this is not to sort of copy the material that they have, although I am pulling directly from the rulebook, but just to present it in a way where a game master could onboard new players to this game without sort of throwing in this big 400 or 500 page book and saying, here, let's go through this, right? And also I wanted to add a visual flair to it, something that would grab attention. So of course, here we are. We have Duke telling us G.I. Joe is the code name for a highly trained special mission force. Their mission to defeat Cobra, a terrorist organization determined to rule the world. We've recruited you because you are the best in your chosen field and have the grit to be a G.I. Joe recruit. So that's sort of what now how you would present this is you could either digitally present this to your players like I'm doing now, or you could print this off and have this at your gaming table if you're doing this in a face-to-face manner. Whatever works for you. So here we go. The first thing that you're going to want to know about the G.I. Joe role-playing is that it uses a brand new role-playing system, rule system. It is lightly based off Dungeons & Dragons 5e. It is a Hasbro property, but Hasbro in this case sort of shopped this out to a company called Renegade Game Studios. And they did an amazing job. As you're going to see in the next little bit here during this stream, that this rule system is just phenomenal. I mean, I love it. It's clean. I came away from this wishing that they would develop a fantasy property with this system. This system is known as the Essence system, Essence 20 system. So I just love it, and I hope that they adapt it to other genres. Worth mentioning that this rule system is the same rule system that powers the Power Rangers role-playing game that is out by Renegade Game Studios, as well as the Transformers role-playing game, which I also have. So if I keep up my creative streak here, you'll probably see me talking about the Transformers role-playing game soon. So let's talk about the Essence 20 system. So Essence 20, the play on words here is it's the S's, the Essence roll 20, so which is the S's. So your core attributes in this game are strength, speed, smarts, and social. Now let that sink in for a second here, because we're used to 6, maybe more depending on the game, attributes that define your character. Renegade Game Studios has gone with this as their de facto way to encapsulate a character in their game system. Strength, speed, smarts, and social. I think it works. As you'll see, there are sort of minutia and layers to these as we go along that can flesh out the whole word. So speed, you're going to see blends into things like agility, as well as how fast you move. Whereas strength also bleeds into things like constitution and stamina. So to start off, when you're making a character very quickly, you get 12 points to divide between 3 abilities. And if you're like me, the first thing you think of is, oh, I'll just put 3 in each and just divide it up evenly. But a drink here. A little thing that you're going to find out very quickly is that you do get more essence points. So think of this as your basic default human being at this point. Anybody that's going to NPC otherwise is going to have 12 points. So you divide those up, and we'll go to the next step. So we're going to talk about some basic rules in the role-playing game first. So the core of Essence 20 is a D20. In actual fact, there's other dice that you're going to use in the game. But the core, and the reason I say core rule, you'll see in a bit, is that it's all about rolling a d20. It's one of the things in D&D that I try and stress to my players as well, is that really D&D is just rolling a d20. I mean, there are instances where you're going to roll other dice, but I try and get it into everybody's head that it's just about rolling that one dice. You don't have to go scrambling around looking for what dice. The minutia of D&D is that you have spells and abilities and such that, yes, will use different dice, but for the most part, you're going to be using that one dice. Okay. So the way that the game works is it's based on incremental totals. So when you roll a d20, you're rolling against a difficulty number. You add the result to any skills or whatever you get, and that's your total result. And I'm going to show you how dice pools work in a bit, but essentially it's that simple. You're rolling against a difficulty number. So here's difficulty. So I'm just going to check here, guys. Hold on. Okay, so the G.I. Joe role-playing game uses a system of difficulty numbers to determine whether you succeed at a given task. When you're working against an enemy, you're up against their defenses, sorry. But when you're up against the mission or the story, your GM uses a tiered list. So you as a player choose the skill that best fits the situation, and you roll your dice according to your skill pool. If you get higher than the difficulty, you succeed. So the categories are broken down into 7 different categories. You have your extremely simple, which is a difficulty 5. And this is very similar to the Dungeons and Dragons, right? You have routine, which is 10. You have challenging, which is 15. You have difficult, which is 20. You have formidable, which is 25, and you have nearly impossible, which is 30. Now, the key here is that if you are working against somebody, just like in D&D, the difficulty number is not going to be abstract. It's going to be based on the opposing force. So if it is a character, for example, you're going to roll your dice against a difficulty number based on them, as opposed to something your Dungeon Master just comes up with. Did a little slide here on initiative. I'm going to skip over that one because this does involve a little bit of knowledge of the other part that we're going to talk about in a second, as well as actions and such, and we're going to come back to that. So let's talk about picking your skills. So remember when I had you pick or remember when we said you're going to allocate 12 points into your 4 different essences? So the next step in character creation is actually taking the amount of points that you allocated to each one of those abilities, and you're actually going to, for each point you chose, you're actually going to purchase a skill that belongs under that tree or under that category. So strength will have its own list of skills, speed will have its own list of skills, same with smarts, and same with social. So you're going to have skills that are different depending on the category. So let's just say, for example, that you put 4 points into your strength. Well, those 4 points now get to be used by you to put, we're going to call them points, but more appropriately, add dice to your pool. Okay, what I mean by that is for every point that you choose in a skill, it's going to equate into a die. So you'll see here that you have D2, which is basically a flip of a coin, D4, D6, D8, D10, D12. So every time you put a point into an appropriate skill, you're going to get that dice at the base level, say D2. And if you put another point, you're going to get D4 instead of the D2. And then if you put another point, you're going to have a D6 instead of the D4. You don't keep adding the dice. You just upgrade the die to the next tier. So, for example, let's just say here, matter of factly, I'm going to say I put 4 points into strength, and I look down at my skills and I go, I've got athletics, brawn, conditioning, intimidation, and might. Okay, so athletics is basically pinpoint use of strength or burst use of strength, lifting, throwing, that kind of stuff. Brawn is more of a sustained use of your strength. That's where I mentioned earlier about your constitution. Okay. Your conditioning is actually going to go directly into your hit point stat. So just like in most role-playing games, you're going to have a health score. Well, in G.I. Joe, you have that as well. Every point that you put into conditioning gives you an additional hit point. Okay. Intimidation is your ability to influence the decision of others using blunt force, if you will, or threat of blunt force. And might is essentially your de facto hand-to-hand combat or melee combat skill. So whether you're using a bat, a big axe, a cudgel, or anything that's used with swinging strength, that's going into might. So you take your 4 points, you say, this is the beginning of sculpting your character. You'd say, okay, do I want my guy to be more intimidating? Do I want him to be more of an athletic type guy? Or do I really want him to kick butt in combat? And you'd slot in. The maximum you can put in is up to D12. So if I put all 4 of those into might, I would actually have a D8. And I would circle that little box there to show my game master that I have a D8. Now, going back to the previous section, we talked about difficulty numbers. If you needed to make a roll using your might skill, you pick up a D20 and you pick up a D8, you roll both those dice and add them together. And then you consult the difficulty number. So that's how this all rolls together. Okay, I'm going to show you the next category. Speed. We've got Lady J there giving you a good indication of an example of a Joe with speed. So same thing, for every point that you put in, you're going to get a dice or a dice upgrade. So the skills under speed are acrobatics. Again, we're talking about variations of speed, so agility coming into factor under the essence of speed. We have driving, we have finesse. Now, finesse is a little bit different than might. Finesse is weapons that require finesse. So rather than a big blunt broadsword, we're talking about samurai katana, ninja swords, could also be nunchaka. Any kind of sort of martial arts type weapon would fall into the finesse category, or anything that your game master views as a weapon that is more than just lumbering strength to wield. Infiltration, obviously it's their version of stealth. We have initiative, And the initiative system in the G.I. Joe role-playing game is quite cool. I love it. We'll get into that afterwards. But essentially, it's the same thing. You're adding dice to the pool. And targeting is your catch-all for any kind of firearms, any kind of thrown weapons, any ranged attacks are going to go into targeting. So again, you select your dice based on what you put into your essence category, and you select your skills accordingly. Go to smarts, good old dial tone. So smart skill categories are alertness, which is basically your perception. Culture would be how knowledgeable you are in other countries and other cultures, really. Science would be more of your specific knowledge of not technology per se, but just specific science, educated science. And then we have survival, pretty self-explanatory. And then we have technology. And technology would be different from science in the sense that this would be just knowledge about tech. So we're not talking about biology and things like that. That would fall under science. Then last we have social. And the social skill sets are animal handling. Self-explanatory. We have deception, which could cover lying. It could cover a lot of different things, but your game master will sort of dictate what you can and can't do with deception. Performance could be not only just singing, dancing, acting, could be a lot of different things. Could go hand in hand with deception, in fact. Persuasion. Persuasion is one of those skills in D&D and any role-playing game as well. It's always kind of a weird one because, as a dungeon master, do you want your players to be able to accomplish something by a die roll, or do you want them to role-play their way out of the situation? So I'm not going to make a decision on that, but that's what persuasion is. And then streetwise is how much street knowledge your character has. Okay. Now I'm going to go back and show you something that I didn't mention at the top, but it is worth mentioning. Okay, I'm going to go all the way back to strength. So there's a little category called specializations. Okay, specializations are your way to say, okay, let's just pick on might. So might, let's just say I have 4 dice and I put 3 of them into might. So I've got a D6 right now in might. But let's just say I want my guy to be really good at swinging around this custom battle axe that he's going to carry into battle. Let's just say he's just a real kind of archaic, barbaric type guy who has a favorite axe as well as machine gun or whatever he brings. Say I want my game master to really acknowledge that. You can spend a skill point on a specialization. And how that works is you spend a point in addition to the points you've already spent. So I've already spent 3 dice to get my might up to D6. And I decide I want to specialize in this axe. So I click on specialization, or I fill that in and spend a point. So now I've spent all 4 of my points now. And I write down axe or battle axe, or even give it a specific name. What that does now is that says as a general skill of might, meaning general weapons, baseball bats, any kind of real weapon that the game master decides is going to be a might skill use, I'm rolling D6. But if I'm going into battle with this specialty axe or this specialization in axes, the minute I get myself an axe, not only rolling a D6, but I'm rolling all of the dice underneath of that tier. So I'm going to pick up a D6, I'm going to pick up a D4, and I'm going to grab a D2 token, which is a coin flip or a D4 divided by 2. But I'm going to grab all 3 of those dice. Then I'm going to grab my D20, and I'm going to go roll all of those dice for the challenge or for the difficulty. And I'm going to take my D20 result, and then I'm going to pick the best out of all of the dice pool. Because I have a specialization, I can roll all of the dice that's underneath of my main skill. So all the ones underneath of D6, including the D6, and I pick the highest out of those. So you can see how specialization is really going to give you that advantage. You can imagine, if you will, if you had a D10 or a D12 or even a D8, right? You're going to get to roll that many more dice and be able to choose from the dice pool. You don't get to add all the dice pool up. You just choose the best result from the dice pool and then add that to your D20. Okay. Now there are other factors that are going to factor in as far as trying to get those high numbers, but that's the gist of it. And you can do a specialization in any skill as long as your game master approves the item that you're wanting to specialize in. So now that I've gone over the skill allocation, I'm going to go back. I'm going to show you how initiative works. The initiative system in Essence 20 is really one of the coolest initiative systems that I've come by. And it's not really that different from Dungeons and Dragons, but I'm going to show you. So we talked about putting skills into speed, and one of them was initiative, and I glossed over it, but you notice that initiative still does have the dice options, just like all the other skills. So I'm going to just read from my slide here. I'm going to say, do you have the pressing need to react first in any situation? Then you need to make sure you allocate some of those precious skill points into initiative. Whenever a dicey situation starts, the GM will get everyone to roll an initiative skill check. Okay? The results are then listed from highest to lowest, and players react in that order. Okay? If you don't have any skill types in initiative, then you just roll the core D20, and you get what's called a snag. This is a good opportunity to talk about snags. Snags are the equivalent, essence equivalent of disadvantage. Edge is another term we're going to come across, and that's the essence 20 version of advantage. So if you don't have any skill points in a specific skill, you actually incur a snag. So if you decided not to allocate any, you still get to roll your core D20, but not only that, it is roll twice and pick the lower of the two. Okay. Now, the cool thing about initiative in G.I. Joe is that if you don't like your initiative score, you can spend an action to reset your initiative. So you don't need to be stuck with that really bad initiative roll round to round. You can use your action to reset it. You just basically roll again. So in this case, if you had put some skills, so let's just say you had a 3 in speed, for example, and you allocated 2 dice for your initiative, you would then get to add a D4 to your dice pool. So you'd roll your D20 and a D4, okay? And then you would roll those two, and you actually get to add the D4 because it's just added to your pool. So you, in theory, could get up to 24 in that case, right? And you wouldn't suffer the snag because you have a skill point in it. That's basically how initiative works, but I love the fact that they've got a system that accommodates being able to re-roll. So that's just pure coolness right off the bat right there, okay? So we're going to talk about actions before we go into the next step of character creation. Actions in G.I. Joe is also handled a lot cooler than I've seen other games do it. So it's based on your speed as far as how many actions you can take in a round. So games like Dungeons and Dragons typically say you can move and take an action. And an action can be a variety of different things, from attacking to opening doors to a lot of different things, depending on what the GM views as an action. In the G.I. Joe role-playing game, it's dictated by your speed. So if you have a speed of 1, you've only put 1 dice in there, then you can move or perform an action. You don't get to do both. So contrasting to D&D, where you could have a character with like 3 dexterity and he still gets his 2 actions, right? If you have a speed of 2, you can make a move action and a standard action. So that's pretty normal for role-playing games as well. You also have a certain amount of free actions you can do. Now, free actions in D&D can actually be more than just 1 free action. So here it says you can take a standard action. And it says you can make a move and a standard action. You can trade a standard action for 2 free actions. And if you have a speed of 3 or higher, you can actually make a move, a standard action, and you get a number of free actions equal to your speed minus 2. So if your speed is 2, you get 1 free action. Or speed is 3, you get 1 free action. If your speed is 4, 5, or 6, you can get more free actions. So there's a little bit of a currency involved with your actions in G.I. Joe. Not everybody's on the same playing field. And then just giving you an example of what some actions are. These are sort of free actions here: opening a door, aiming, talking, pushing, putting in a passcode, putting a weapon or item away. Okay, so we'll go back over the skills. And here we go. So the next stage after that initial, and this is how I recommend people make a character in G.I. Joe, is start going through this sequentially. Don't jump in and start jumbling around all these steps, because you'll see in a second, you're going to be awarded or given essence points to pump back into your core stats as you go through these steps. And if you start skipping steps, you're going to start losing track of what you got and what you can do with them. So the very next step in my character creation process is your recruit. What influenced you to start your career with G.I. Joe? Influences can best be described as not a job, not what you did before you started with G.I. Joe, but what influenced you to become who you are today. Were you an artist? Were you an athlete? Did you have some form of a checkered past? Did you love mechanics and working with computers? Gearhead. Martial artist. Did you travel from place to place? Were you a nomad? Did you work as a lawyer or a corporate executive? Or did you just hang around in a small town hoping that you'd get out one day? Thrill seekers, adventurers, basically just painting a picture to the GM and helping your story along and saying, this guy had a life, he's not by definition a GI Joe. So this is a step that all role-playing games encourage. Dungeons and Dragons in 5th edition has almost heavy-handedly put that to the characters and saying you need to have personality, influences, bonds, flaws, that kind of thing, and even giving you proficiencies when you actually decide to take on a background. But again, they don't put it front and center in their rules. I would love to see a D&D rulebook start with that. I would love to see all that being at the front end, front load all that stuff first, and then worry about all the stats, class, and race and stuff. And Renegade Games has done that. Essentially, they've said, whoa, slow your horses. We're going to actually create a fully realized character before we start throwing stats at you. Pick one. You can pick more. There's rules in the book for doing that, but I would say as starting, you'd want to pick one. The next step is your origin. And origin is now getting that one step, that last step before you become a G.I. Joe. What did you do before you recruit a G.I. Joe? So where influence is more about who you are and what you are as a person, your origin is what really were you by profession. So the standard, usual suspects, you have Army, Navy, Air Force. They even go into detail on non-branch specific. So first responders, covert ops, intelligence organizations, FBI, that kind of thing. And then non-military is a pretty wide swath. Civilian, engineer, scientist, any kind of background or job that encompasses something a little bit more than what your average person could do that brought you to the attention of G.I. Joe. Now with these, when you select one, you're going to get some very specific essence increases with these. So this will be your first chance to actually see your stats start to go up. And depending on which one you take, your essences will go up in a very specific way. It's not just random essence points that you're thrown. So obviously engineers, co-ops, first responders, pilots, it all varies. And we're going to get under your role. So this would be your final. Basically, it's a 3-pronged system. You start with your influence, your origin, and then finally your role. And role would be the closest thing you have to a class in G.I. Joe, the role-playing game, if you are, thinking along the lines of Dungeons and Dragons. So we have our commando, we have our renegade, we have infantry, we have officer, we have ranger, vanguard, and technician. And the slide that I've created actually shows sort of pictures to help your players sort of equate. If they don't know G.I. Joe, then the pictures don't mean anything, but you can walk them through the definitions of them. And I think those pretty much encapsulate everything. If you go through the book, you're going to see where the different characters from G.I. Joe fall into these categories. But most notably, Commando is everybody's favorite Snake Eyes. So if you want that cool kick butt, sort of mysterious, sword wielding, ninja star throwing kind of character, Commando is your one. So that's the sort of the basics of the Essence 20. I'm still in the process of tweaking this document and getting it ready for release. I will be releasing it to the community, but that's really sort of what I'm doing is I'm picking out parts of the rulebook and throwing it front and center into the slide. I have another slide that I'm working on that actually is going to break down each class. So it's taking me a little bit longer to transplant that information over in a visual format. So it's a struggle. I'm trying to get help from the community on it. I haven't had much luck so far, but really at the end of the day, it's going to be a document that will exist to help game masters onboard new players. It's not meant to be a reprint of the rulebook, nor is it meant to replace the rulebook. I don't intend to have pages of statistics and information pulled from the book as far as equipment and skills. I'm not reprinting or I'm not scribing the rule book. That's just, it doesn't make any logical sense to do that. But that's sort of the point. Now, one more thing I will mention, you might have players who are not accustomed to this genre. They just might not have any clue what it means to make up a character for G.I. Joe. They might not watch the cartoon, they might be curious about it, but they just don't have a sense of how to go about making a character. So what I've done is I've put together character concepts. And I said to my players, I said, if you like what you see and you like my little description, you can claim that concept. There's no shame in saying I don't have the creative energy to visualize or come up with an idea, but I really want to play this game. So I created about a dozen character concepts. I'm going to walk you through them really quickly, and I'm going to keep them in the slide. Essentially what I did is I took the character sheet, pre-populated with a picture and a sort of general quick little description / background, much like you'd see on the back of a toy. For example, if you were to collect G.I. Joe toys in the 80s, you'd see they had a file card. That's essentially what this is. So let's take a few seconds and walk through it and see what you think. So I actually created all these. I pulled the images from Google. This is Sublime. Real name Jacob Crawley. And Sublime wears a black and yellow tactical uniform with a battle vest for protection. Always ready for battle or whatever Cobra throws his way, Sublime makes sure he has a plethora of pouches and gear on him at all times. He styles his hair. I wouldn't say he styles. He styles his hair. His styles hair and pleasant demeanor. Oh yeah, his styled hair and pleasant demeanor puts everyone at ease, even his enemies. So hence the name Sublime. Then we have Catalyst. This is just a cool picture, really, at the end of the day. I just only threw a cool name. Catalyst is a tall, dark-haired woman with an intense personality. She does not speak much, but prefers her actions to do the talking. She wears a tactical bodysuit with her own sense of style. This is my generic Snake Eyes concept. Cypher. Cypher, like his namesake, is a mystery, a code that hasn't been cracked. He's a trained warrior and a lethal and cunning Joe. He speaks only when he has something important to say, and he wears a suit of protective armor that appears to have a life support system built in. Very few people, if any, have seen what he looks like underneath his battle armor. Pinpoint. Xavier Crenshaw. Pinpoint is an expert marksman with a knack for finding just the right spot to take his shot in the midst of a battle. He wears a full suit of modern combat camo with a helmet and hood, all of which are colored to fit whatever environment he is working in. His helmet is his trademark as it relays all his communication and logistical data from HQ right into his ear. Bubble. I made this up myself. Codename Bubble. Bubble stands for Battle Ready Underwater Biobot Lethal Exoskeleton, or just Bubble for short. Bubble is an artificial AI that has been inputted into a state-of-the-art exoskeleton body to support the Joes on a variety of missions on land and sea. This would be a very tricky character to make because you're an AI, essentially. You're a robotic being. So you'd have to work with your GM to come up with just the right influence and origin. But I think it's a cool concept. I had to throw that in. Snowblind. This is Casey Narucci. Casey comes from a wealthy family who forbid her to travel outside of her home country. She has a passion for exploration and specifically the snowy tundras of the world. She is often found dressed in cold weather BD, battle dress, and outfitted with a variety of survival gear items to assist her in her pursuit of extreme heights and cold weather. Blastback. Ivan McMillan. He's Irish. That was a bad Irish accent. A tall, sturdy oak. Backblast is a large man with a fondness for carrying big guns and big suits of body armor. He is often found at the front of a battle fighting tooth and nail against Cobra no matter how big their guns and vehicles are. He will take it and give it back to the enemy. And then here's another one I like. Jury Rig. Selena Gonzalez. Selena, codename Jury Rig, is a small woman and equally as young. At 19 years of age, she's the youngest Joe ever. Her passion for mechanics is evident by the fact that she carries an assortment of tools and repair gear on her at all times. Preferring to carry nothing but tools, HQ had to mandate that she carry at least a pistol in case things get rough in the field. Cool character idea. Wind Shear. Amber Mason, aka Wind Shear, she's Canadian, just like me, is a hot-headed pilot who loves the challenge and thrill of any kind of vehicle she can get behind the cockpit of. She can commonly be found wearing a variety of flight suits and battle gear suitable for the vehicle she's piloting on the mission. When not behind the wheel, she's usually relaxing by the pool in a pair of cut-off jeans and tank top. I appreciate all of you guys who watched, and make sure you subscribe to this Twitch channel. The Role Playing Game Show doesn't have a YouTube channel yet. So if you do want to follow as far as content goes, you'll find all these videos also on the Game Nexus YouTube channel, as well as our Game Nexus website, intothegamenexus.com. So thanks for tuning in, guys, and you have yourself a great evening and a great week ahead of you.